Once we've loaded up our clips and ensured that they're in sync with each other, the next phase of a stereo project is to ensure that the left and right images are aligned with each other. So let me just turn these into a stereo pair by lining them up, adding stereo effect and double clicking. So we now have our left and right images. So what does stereo alignment mean? Well, we could describe a stereo image as this. We're creating an image for the viewer's left eye and a different image for the viewer's right eye. But those two images should be absolutely identical in every single way, except a tiny horizontal only offset. And the width of that offset is proportional to the distance an object is from the camera. So in other words, if we were to start to compare the left and the right image, as I'm doing now by clicking the shortcut keys on the keyboard, if this image were aligned, what we would observe is no change in color at all, because the colors should be the same, no change in framing at all, and no vertical differences as I jump between the two. As we can see on here, you can see the images jumping up and down between the two, so this is not aligned. So the object of the alignment process is to make the two images exactly the same, with the only difference being a little jump to the left and to the right as we look at the two images. So firstly, let's have a look at the tools that we have to view our image. Once Use Stereo Mode is enabled, these two drop-down boxes come to life. Essentially they look the same, but in fact this second one chooses what type of output goes to the external monitor through the video board. So perhaps this is what your client's looking at. On the other hand, this display here chooses what we're looking at on our display as an operator. So this allows us to go between different modes on our display without upsetting the client view, because as you can see, as I'm going between left and right, the client view isn't changing. So the modes that we have to look at, we have the left and the right eye, and I'm actually jumping between them with the keyboard shortcuts, which is logically R for right and E for left. Why E, not L? Well, just that quite often we want to do this and just jump between quite a lot, and E is next to R on a QWERTY keyboard, L is a long way away. Other modes we have, pop it into anaglyph. So this would work with those funny colored glasses. Essentially the image is split so that the left image is made up of only the red content of the image, and the right image is made up of everything except red. It's easy to remember the right way around. Red is on the left, just as in politics. There's also a black and white anaglyph, so essentially the images are monochromed before they go into the anaglyph process. And it's quite a good view to help us see the misalignment. We can see clearly a vertical misalignment between left and right here. We can use interlaced odd and even. If we're using a stereoscopic computer monitor, that might allow us to see stereo on this display when we're at 1:1 zoom. We can switch to side by side to see both at the same time, or top and bottom. Difference is also a very useful one. Subtract one from the other, again just to show us what's different between the two channels, both in terms of depth and in terms of misalignment. And we also have a checkerboard mode. This is effectively lots of little squares where every other one is from the left and the others are from the right. And finally a simple mix overlay between the two. So to begin an alignment process, I'd start to look at this shot and see the problems that I have. And effectively the tools that I have to align a shot could be divided into 3 or 4 different zones. Over here under Equalize, we have one-click tools that will seek to fix as many problems as possible in the shot in one go. In fact, what these tools do is invoke a number of these individual tools, which can be used to fix individual faults within the image. But both of these tools just populate functions inside the usual Mistika parameters, which means that if they do anything that we don't like, we can actually go in and make manual modifications to any individual parameter it creates. So let's look at those in action. So going back to this shot and going left and right, we can see that the image color is changing, we can see that the image is jumping up and down, and the image jumping up and down could be for a number of reasons. It could be because the cameras aren't exactly aligned properly on the rig, it could be because one is zoomed in more than the other, it could be because one has a little bit of Z rotation on it. So what I'll do is I'm going to hit match colors and match geometry, and what that has done, if we concentrate on this side of the frame first, you can see that my colors are much better matched, certainly good enough I'd say, and you can see that in terms of alignment I'm now only seeing a horizontal jump. If I zoom back to that point we were looking at before, we can see that that corner of the green screen is not going up and down anymore. So as a one hit, that's been quite successful. Now I drew your attention to this side of the frame because I was making you avoid this. If you look at this green, you can see this green is actually still changing colour. We'll come back to fixing that in the next tutorial when we look at more advanced alignment. Effectively, the reason for it is that this wall is shiny, and so one camera is picking up a slight sheen from a light and the other camera isn't. Now when we hit match colours, what happens is Mistika calculates an overall colour grade for the whole frame, which as you can see works on the majority of the frame. But this is just fundamentally different between the left and the right image, in that this green is simply not the same between the left and the right. So it will need to be graded individually. But we'll look at some advanced tools that will actually allow us to do that automatically as well. So ignoring that, we've actually got quite a good lineup at the moment. And that would be good enough to go on with for this particular shot. But let's look at the semi-auto tools here, which we would use more likely in the areas where these are not successful. So generally you'd start with these tools, and if they work, great, next shot. And if they don't, we'll go over to here and work with the individual elements that will fix alignment issues. So I'm just going to delete the folder Balanced Geometry. So I've now gone back to not having any fixes on my geometry, but I've actually kept the color fix that it gave me. Incidentally, if we open up these, Adjust Geometry and Balance Geometry, we can actually see some similarities. For example, Adjust Geometry has a zoom, and Balance Geometry also has a zoom. So what's the difference? Well, Adjust Geometry, if I bring up an anaglyph mode so we can look at both channels. Adjust Geometry, everything in here will work on both channels at the same time. So you can use this for reframing and so on. So I'm zooming up and down. You notice as I come to the edges, it's extruding the edges in order to avoid any blackness coming in when you're doing alignments. You can change that actually under the Image tab. Here, border can be black if you prefer. If we look at the zoom under the Balanced Geometry, we'll see it works differently. That actually it's doing a contra zoom between left and right. So the difference is Adjust Geometry is to make an overall adjustment to the shot, whereas Balanced Geometry is to make an adjustment to both or one of the channels in order to make it match the other. At the moment you can see it's contra zooming the left and right together. If I change the apply to just left only, you'll see that my change is only happening on the left, likewise only on the right. This apply rule here also affects how the parameters of these semi-auto tools are read. Normally you'd want to apply your balancing to both channels equally, so that both channels find their way to a happy medium. But there are some situations in a production pipeline where you might have agreed at the outset that you will not touch the right image, for example, and all your changes will be made to the left image. An example might be where perhaps there's some CGI done and they've used the right images to measure their positions, in which case you're not going to make yourself popular if you start moving around the right image. But unless you're looking out for preserving one of the eyes to be exactly as shot, then you can normally leave these on LR. And just while we're on the topic, Balance Color and Adjust Color have a similar idea, again with the ability to make the color fixes happen to both eyes to find a happy medium, or to one eye or the other. So back to these tools. As I was saying, you'd normally hit an image initially with these. And then if there's anything that's not successful about how they've fixed the image, then we can move on to these. What these allow us to do is to fix each individual problem one at a time, but still using a point and click interface. So starting with match move and ensuring that auto match is on, you can see that wherever I click, Mistika will make a move to ensure that wherever I click becomes perfectly aligned with each other. So if I were aligning this image semi-manually like this, the first thing I'd do is find a point where I could tell Mistika to make a perfect match. But then I'd ask it to match the size, because you can see I've got a perfect overlay here, but you can see the eyes are off here, which means that almost certainly the zoom of the two lenses didn't match. So with this point locked, I could now move on to match size, or I could use the shortcut, which is Control and click for match size, and now click somewhere else. So you can see that now Mistika has also added in a zoom into the equation. So it's locked this point positionally, and using that point as a point of pivot, it's also now carried out a zoom as well. Now there's also match rotate. Actually, there doesn't appear to be any particular rotational problems on here. A rotate problem would manifest itself as having an alignment perhaps on this side, but then on the other side of the image we'd see a vertical jump because the image is rolled in Z, so an alignment is progressively getting worse across the frame. If I were to use match rotate, then a rotation would happen around the point of pivot, and the point of pivot always ends up where you last clicked match move, but you can set it independently, so you can make the rotate and the zoom operate from any point in the image. However, of course, it does make sense that the pivot is on a point that you've matched, because otherwise the rotation is going to unmatch that point. In terms of choosing where in the image you start to make these picks, well, if you ask 5 different Mistika operators, they'll probably tell you 5 different ways of doing it, because the truth is it's pretty dependent upon the makeup of the shot. What I'll generally try to do is go in the order of match move, then match scale, or match size rather, and then match rotate. And so for that end, I'll be looking to try and find 2 points, one of which I can match move and one of which I can match scale, that are ideally on the same plane, so that the maths aren't skewed by the fact that an object is further away than the point that I've originally picked, so there would be a difference. And also I look for 2 points that are as far away as possible from each other, because the further they are away, the greater the accuracy will be. So that's why I picked a position on her dress, and then at the opposite end of the frame, a position on her face. And likewise for match rotate, finding something that's a good distance away from the pivot. Of course, these point and clicks work on the assumption that Mistika's optical flow will happily locate the object in the left and right image and be able to recognize where that object needs to be moved to. There are some situations where the optical flow might fail, particularly if you have an image with a lot of repetitive patterns where it might see the pattern in many places. In which case we can also switch off the auto match function and simply do it by eye. So for example, if I went to match rotate and switch off auto match, then simply by dragging on the image I can manually find the point that I want. So far we've looked at how we would physically offset the image, or change its size or scaling, or changing its Z rotation so that the left and right images line up perfectly. We've also got these functions for match shear and match scale X. So let's look at the scenarios where this occurs. So what is shear? Well, this image doesn't actually have any shear problems, so I'm going to create some. So what I'm going to do, bear with me a second, is I'm just going to cheat and insert onto the right eye. I'm going to cause it a problem by shearing it, and then it's easier to explain what shear actually means. So, have a look at the wall. If I do a match move down here, whoops, switch auto match back on, we can see that we've got a horizontal difference at the top of the wall compared to the bottom. Now this is a very difficult fault for a computer to fix, because this now needs a human brain to tell us that the bottom of this wall is surely as far away from the camera as the top of the wall, yet the horizontal offset is telling us that this top of the wall is substantially further away or substantially closer to the camera than the bottom. And we know that that can't be true, because that wall must be vertical. And this sometimes happens where cameras aren't quite correctly mounted, particularly into mirror rigs, where the two cameras are supposed to be at 90 degrees to each other, but they may not be quite at 90 degrees, and you'll get this kind of shear effect, as it's called. So the way I make match shear work is I find something I know to be vertical, and I do a match move X. The difference between match move and match move X, as you can probably work out, is that match move will move the channels in every which direction in order to affect a perfect overlay, whereas match move X will only make a positional change in the X direction. So having got a line up on the bottom of the wall, I can then use match shear on the top of the wall in order to bring that line back into the vertical. Match scale X is a similar problem that's difficult for a computer to work out. So again, let's simulate it by screwing with the right eye. So I'm just going to clear that down that I'd made before. And what I'm actually going to do is put a little bit of zoom in the X direction. So my right image is slightly fatter than my left image. And let's just go back up to here and clear out the shear changes we were doing. So what we get now is a problem that might be caused, for example, from two anamorphic lenses, where the actual amount of anamorphic squish, if you like, for want of a better technical term, is different between the lenses. And again, it's hard for a computer to understand by looking at an image that that would be wrong, because if I do a match move on his eye here, we can see that there's a jump in horizontal position on her eye. But again, logically, with a human brain, I would say that she can't be substantially at a different distance from the camera than him. So why would there be this horizontal offset? Well, I would deduce that that's because of this problem of the lenses being not very well matched. So in this case, with a match move that's on a given plane, I'll then look for somewhere else on the same plane and hit match scale X. And now you can see that both eyes are in alignment. So that's match shear and match scale X. Match dark and light were the predecessors to match colors. In most scenarios, match colors is likely to give you a better result than using match dark and match light. But if you wanted to, you can press match dark and say that this is a dark color in the scale that should match between the two, and match light, this is a light color that should match between the two. And Mistika will create a curve that makes that happen. You'll also notice that when I press match dark, actually Mistika automatically enabled this function, align warp, which is actually quite a nifty little gadget that Mistika has for helping us with our alignments, and particularly our color alignments. I'm going to switch it off, and I'm going to go back to that checkerboard mode. So this is showing us left, right, left, right, left, right. But it's still quite difficult, if I was trying to work out whether there's any colored problems in this area, to tell if there are any differences, because of course the horizontal offset that we naturally get from a stereo image breaks this up, so I can't really tell. So what align warp will do is it will interpolate the positions from the two cameras and simulate what the image would be like if both the cameras were pointing from exactly the same direction. So now you can see it's a lot easier to tell where our color problems are. You can now make out, certainly if I zoom in there, you can now make out the color differences from the related part of the frame. Whereas with Align Warp Off, it's a lot harder to see whether there's a color problem or not. Pictail, pickhead and floating windows we'll look at in another tutorial about making stereo footage more comfortable to view. Match Move X we touched on before, and actually it's quite a nice way of setting a convergence point. So once I've done my alignment, I know that I don't want to now make any vertical changes or scale changes to the image, so I can just use Match Move X to say I'd like to converge here, or I'd like to converge there, or I'd like to converge here. So just as a reminder, the point of convergence is where an object from the left and the right images perfectly overlay with each other, so they find themselves in the same horizontal position on the frame. And the result of that is that whatever's on the point of convergence will look like it's on the screen, as in it's exactly at the depth the screen is in the cinema or on TV. And then anything further away will look like it's going into the screen or into the TV, and anything closer to us than that particular point will feel like it's coming out. So we can use this to quickly choose a point. Because all of these tools are simply populating our normal parameters, then our normal parameter rules apply. So all the parameters have curves that we can animate or keyframe. The auto key still functions as normal. So if I wanted to do a transitioning convergence point, I could say that on the beginning of the frame, I'd like to converge on him. But by the end of the frame, I'd like to converge here. So now what we get is an animating convergence point, which you can see from the drain pipe there, getting wider apart. This is also how we could fix a varying problem in a shot if you're unlucky enough to be given footage from a stereoscopic rig that's not stable. With auto key on, we could simply go through the shot, hitting match geometry at various points in the shot, and it would keyframe the differences to ensure that even if the alignment was changing, we could animate a correction to fit it. So that's how we use the basic tools of alignment in Mistika. If we're happy that this alignment has worked, then we can of course use the propagate functions to send our corrections to similar shots. And in the next tutorial we'll have a look at some more complex fixes.